health is so much more than even the foods we eat, than the exercise that we do, what we do to manage stress, our sleep. I used to think, oh, that's the secret. If we get all those dialed in, everything will be perfect. But it has so much more to do with our emotional health and our spiritual health, and just how we are aligned with and understand our purpose, why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing, the people and the relationships that we have. I think that we can focus in on all of the other details of health and all the latest health trends and wellness trends. But if we miss that part, we're really missing what health is all about and what life is all about. And at the end of the day, that's why I think health is so important, is so that it allows us to do what we're put on this earth to do.
Let's link up with Krysta on the FYX. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Dr. Julie, welcome to the FYX podcast. I am honored and so excited to have you today. Like I mentioned pre-recording, we could take this conversation in so many directions, and I am very excited to see where it goes. But it's actually been a minute since I've had a guest on the show. I want to say my last 3 episodes have all been solo episodes, and I'm excited to bring somebody back in, especially somebody who has a ton of knowledge to share with us. So thank you for being here. And I typically kick off all of my guest interviews the same way, and it's kind of a big question, so you can take this wherever you would like to. But as somebody who has the credentials that you do, has had the experience in CrossFit that you've had, I really want to know who you are, but instead of answering it from like a resume perspective, and we are going to get into all of that, tell me who you are in the context of why our listeners should care about what you have to say about what Wild Health stands for and about what you do in the wellness industry.
Wow, that's a big question to start with. Oh gosh. Well, first, I just have to say thank you for having me, Krysta. I'm so excited to be here and honored to be a guest. As you said, you haven't had one in a while, and with your new studio, it looks amazing.
Thank you.
I have a very strong faith in a much higher power and a higher purpose for my life. And I just have a lot of gratitude for the experiences that I've had, whether it's CrossFit or medical school or being able to learn about different aspects of health. And I think one of the things that has become increasingly clear to me especially over the last few years, is that, since the pandemic, since so many of these things that are happening around the world, is that health is so much more than even the foods we eat, than the exercise that we do, what we do to manage stress, our sleep. I used to think, oh, that's the secret. If we get all those dialed in, everything will be perfect. But it has so much more to do with our emotional health and our spiritual health, and just how we are aligned with and understand our purpose, why we're here, why we're doing what we're doing, the people and the relationships that we have. I think that we can focus in on all of the other details of health and all the latest health trends and wellness trends. But if we miss that part, we're really missing what health is all about and what life is all about. And at the end of the day, that's why I think health is so important, is so that it allows us to do what we're put on this earth to do.
I mean, talk about a great response. I think we found our intro quote for the show, just to kind of like encapsulate the entire chat. I absolutely love that. I love that for so many reasons. First and foremost, this is kind of perfect timing to have this conversation, because I just 2 days ago kicked off a challenge inside of the athletic facility where I work. And it's the first time with this population that I'm working with that we're doing a nutrition challenge. And a lot of them are very enthusiastic. And I focus specifically on macros. But like you mentioned, there's a whole lot more to it. And a couple of the things you brought up, the sleep, the stress management, how we deal with a lot of those things, that's really where I was kind of getting their feet wet and understanding, okay, the macros are great. We want to get our protein in. We're going to talk about how we can achieve all of that. We're going to talk about the fact that there's different ways to manage that and measure it and make sure we're working towards whatever goals we set for ourselves. But I think so often we tend to get lost in the day-to-day of like what we actually have to do to get to the goal, which is great. Don't get me wrong, right? So many times people set the goal and then they forget about all the steps in between. So if you can get yourself to focus on the micro decisions and the day-to-day and everything that you do to reach the other side or the path that you're trying to climb, the road you're trying to climb, whatever it is, the mountain you're trying to climb, I should say, it's really easy to forget about exactly what you said. It's so easy to forget about our emotional health and how that really fits into everything. And I personally see that as in having these conversations this week and this just being so fresh on my mind, I see that tying in to our decisions and to our day-to-day by being really honest with yourself about what you can actually handle. Because I would love, and I'd love your take on this and just your opinion on this, kind of an open-ended question, but I think that's where I find between this population that I'm working with inside of my gym and then the women who typically are a part of my one-on-one nutrition coaching program, so many of them are so high achieving, which is incredible, but they tend to have this pattern in their lives where they're really high achieving with everything external and the stuff that doesn't have to do with them as a person. Yeah. The things that make them amazing at their jobs, the things that make them incredible partners, friends, coworkers, all the different hats that we wear on a day-to-day basis. We often don't allow ourselves to pour those same efforts and qualities back into us. And it's a slippery slope that we run down, coupled with this idea of like pressure that because we are so high achieving, the minute we decide that we're going to join an accountability challenge or hire a coach, it's like 0 to 360. And if we don't get to 360, we immediately fail. I interpret a lot of that as starting up here, but I'd love your take on kind of that thought process.
I mean, this is one of my favorite conversations and topics to have.
Perfect.
So I'm
Let's do
so
it.
glad that we're going this direction. And I couldn't agree with you anymore. And I think a lot of, I've had a lot of sort of growth as a person, especially over the last couple of years. And a lot of this has been my journey, like my exact journey as a woman. And I think it's so common among females just because of the world that we live in and the different influences over our lives. And so for me, I felt like for so much of my life up until a couple of years ago, there was a huge focus on the external world, like you say, on these achievements. I was always trying to get good grades, do very well in school. I was in sports. It was always like, what's the next thing I can do, the next hoop I can jump through, whether it was CrossFit or, my board exams, residency, all of those things. And then I got to a point after residency, and I was always very much, trying to do the right things for my health and take care of myself. And where I finally had some time and space, which is so rare for us to get in life because we're always on to the next thing. We're always busy. We're always thinking 10 steps ahead. And, even as we close one chapter in life, maybe from school or from one job to another job or, becoming a parent, there's so many of these life milestones. We often have the next, several stages planned out and backup plans and everything. And I found myself for the first time in life just having blank space. And that to me was the most healthy time because it allowed me a lot of reflection, a lot of introspection. And part of my growth has been understanding, that it's valuable to pour so much into those achievements and milestones and those external things. But there was also, for me, it was coming from a place of feeling like I was lacking somehow. I didn't really have a lot of self-love, self-respect, and pouring myself into all of those other things was a way for me to feel like I could have appreciation or meaning or try to fill some hole that I still had deep inside. And I think so many of us have that, and it comes
that's
from
why I'm
the
smiling
smallest
so big.
Yeah,
it relate.
Comes from the smallest things, like in our childhood when we're growing up, that we don't even realize. And I had an amazing childhood. It's not like I came from a really bad situation. But we all, the point is that we all have these things and these patterns where we think, whether it's the external world, whether it's social media, these voices that are telling us we're not good enough. And so for me, a lot of that work was internal and helping me to really love myself and all the unique things about me, and not necessarily want to compare myself to anyone else, but just really focus on myself, and then take care of myself out of that self-love, and not because I was trying to make up for something that I was lacking. And that's where the difference is, I think. I think that like we can do the same exact actions in terms of measuring our macros, in terms of making sure we get enough sleep, tracking our HRV, all these things we can do. But the intent behind it is what makes all the difference. Is it because I really love myself and I'm trying to take care of myself and be the best version of myself? Or is it because I think that I'm failing and I need to control all these things in order to prove myself, in order to like, if I just do X, Y, and Z, like finally everything will be okay. And if we constantly go down that path, like it's a never ending path. We're never going to get what we think is at the end of the rainbow. It's all about like that internal work, like you said.
Hell yeah. It's that question of like tying your values to the why. So it's not just the why itself, right? And I think sometimes those can get mixed up a little bit because we get so focused on the action steps and the day to day. And even if we have something else in the back of our mind that we use as a motivator, a driver, or what's helping us stay aligned to whatever the mission is that we're trying to accomplish, I think at the same time, because like you said, we don't take the space, we don't take the time. When you were describing the fact that you had this space and time, my next question was going to be if that made you uncomfortable. And at first,
so uncomfortable.
were you saying to yourself, I don't know what to do with this? Like, did you have that thought process initially?
It was so uncomfortable just to sit. I mean, just think about how uncomfortable it is for any of us to sit, like why meditation is so hard for people, because our mind is constantly going to the next thing. Like, how can I plan? How can I prepare? How can I make sure that like the bad outcome doesn't happen? How can I make sure that I mitigate anything that could go wrong? And so I would say it was like that on a much more macro level of just being very uncomfortable and just trusting that whatever is next for me is what's going to happen. And so that is an uncomfortable place to be, but by embracing it, I experienced so much more growth than I ever thought possible.
I love everything you just said. And I think the biggest thing that I hear when you're telling that story and us just talking about like having this white space, right? And having that time to really think, it's a matter of understanding how to control the controllables, but also balance that out with what is very realistic for Krysta today, because that might change tomorrow and it might change the next week and the week after that. And I find that a lot of my clients, they often come to me, and I think you were kind of getting at this too, Julie. They will come to me when there's a lot of chaos in their life because they're searching for control. And they feel that focusing in on food in particular is going to be the way to solve some of those problems. And what I then find when I work with them is so much of our conversation winds up having to do nothing with food, and it has to do with health, of course. Like it has to do with their spiritual, their mental, getting them on a gym routine, whatever it is. But it's usually a conversation around things like boundaries, time management, stress management, and all the other periphery kind of stuff. And I, as I start thinking about that, and then I think about you and your story and just knowing your path, where I really kind of want to take this is in two ways, but I also kind of want to talk about both CrossFit and medicine at the same time. So you can take this wherever you want to go.
Topics.
Yes, but I'd love to know, I know from listening to other podcasts with your story, you knew like since high school, right, that you wanted to go into medicine. And it sounds like it wasn't until a few years into med school that you got this exposure to functional medicine, and that's really driven a lot of the rest of your career. Knowing all that, I don't know a ton about your CrossFit story outside of the accomplishments that you've had inside of it, which are incredible, and we can talk about that. But I really kind of want to know like where the two intersected. So was it like the chicken or the egg? Like did CrossFit come first, or were you that crazy person who is super high achieving and somehow found the time to go to med school and start doing CrossFit and manage all of that and then turn that into its own thing, for lack of a better word?
Great question. And that's one of the things I think I was hinting at the beginning about how grateful I am for just the way my path came together, because they definitely intersected, but it wasn't that way at first. I grew up doing gymnastics.
Cool.
And so that was my main sport in high school.
Awesome.
And then when I got to college, I didn't really know what to do with myself. And so I had
that happen too.
Years of, the traditional, like go to the gym, put your notes on the treadmill and walk or do the elliptical and count your calories. And I just knew something was missing. And it was about halfway through college that I first heard about CrossFit. And when I heard about it, I immediately knew that it was what I had been looking for, just the way that it was a little bit of everything. There was some gymnastics, there was some weightlifting, some running and endurance. And when I first walked into the CrossFit affiliate in Ann Arbor, Michigan, it just felt like, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. And so at first I was just doing it for my own health, and I had a lot of fun. And then I started joining local competitions and really
Cool.
surprised myself along the way. And then that was 2010, I qualified to my first CrossFit Games. So it was kind of this whirlwind. And next thing I know, I'm there and I'm at the CrossFit Games, and it becomes this huge part of my life. And so I continued competing. And, by this point, it was really around the same time I was starting the process of applying to med school, of doing
Yeah.
my MCATs and my applications.
A
And
very intense time.
yeah. And so I was kind of like, I'm very grateful for this looking back, because the ball was already rolling in terms of me going to med school.
Okay.
And if I had started CrossFit a little bit earlier, there's a chance I could have postponed med school and tried to focus on CrossFit. And there's a chance I might not have made it at all. I mean, I know
Sure.
there were other women that I competed alongside where that was the case. And so I'm glad though that I did pursue both, because they have come together in a really beautiful way. And so I competed as I began my first year of med school. It was a very kind of stressful transition time. I moved to a new city, started med school, and then within a few weeks, I'm competing at the CrossFit Games and had some other life things going on at the same time. And then I really wanted to try to compete during med school, during my first year of med school. I thought it was possible. I had seen sort of what the workload would be like.
Sure.
It turned out to be one of the most stressful years of my life, but
I can only
I
imagine.
had no regrets. But it also, like we have talked about a bit before, it really helped me to understand the importance of knowing my why.
Okay.
Because for so long with CrossFit, I think I just kept going back year after year because was good at it. Because, oh, well, you keep doing well, of course you're going to go back and do it again.
Sure.
And so it really forced me, when things got hard, to stop and ask myself, why am I doing this? And is this really something I want to do? And that was very helpful for me. And so during that first year of med school, I would say it was right around the end of the first year of med school, beginning of the second year, is when I started to see how these two things could come together. With regard to med school, when I went in, you mentioned, perfectionist tendencies. I definitely had those, and, grew up doing gymnastics and doing really well in school. And I thought, I want to be a super specialist doctor. I want to know
Okay.
one part of the body really well. I thought maybe even surgery. And, the idea of doing something very broad was overwhelming to me. And so I thought, the only thing I can rule out is primary care. There's no way I want to do primary care. But then, of course, the more I get into CrossFit and the more I learn about CrossFit, not just the CrossFit Games, but the real purpose behind CrossFit, the methodology, the fact that it really is for everyone. And the goal is to help people be as healthy as possible and be able to move functionally throughout all the years of their lives, and really create health. It just made me see the importance of that. And I was seeing at the same time as I started med school, very naive, I was starting to learn about how broken our healthcare system is, how big the burden of chronic disease is, how much most of this disease is preventable or treatable with lifestyle. And the contrast between what was happening in the doctor's offices I was spending time in and what was happening in the CrossFit affiliates I was spending time in was very dramatic.
I'm
So
sure.
yeah, I would go to the offices. I'm learning, the basics of how to do an exam and take history. And I'm seeing patients who, you come in, you spend 15 minutes with them. They maybe have some high blood pressure, some high blood sugar. You talk to them about doing, eating better, exercising. And I was, of course, super passionate about it. I'm trying to teach people how to do burpees in the office. And then they come back 6 months later and nothing's happened, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not the environment to make those changes. You have 15 minutes with someone once every 6 months, you can't really expect much to change. It's so much more about where they're living their day-to-day lives and what their community is like. And so that's what I was seeing on the other hand. In the CrossFit affiliates, people were coming off their medications. They were getting healthier, reversing their chronic disease, gaining confidence, doing things they never thought they could do. And it was this light bulb of, wow, that's really where we create health. And the medical system is awesome for acute issues, but it's not creating health. And so that's when I really realized I want to be on the front end of this. I don't want to be taking care of people after they get sick in the hospital. I would much rather help people become the healthiest versions of themselves and really try to bridge this gap between the fitness industry, the health and wellness industry, and what's happening in the medical system, because there's this huge disconnect, but there's this huge opportunity if we can help people be healthier where we won't need as much of the medical system and we won't have such a burden on our healthcare system.
Huge opportunity. I mean, I'm sure you can totally understand the frustration around this, but more and more, especially in dealing with the female population in particular, I have so many conversations about gut health and hormones.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to say, and I've had a few other medical professionals on the show, Dr. Casey Means from Levels has shared very similar sentiments to you. And I love the episode I did with her. It was a little over a year ago. And she shared a lot of the same outlook. And I think the thing that I feel on a day-to-day basis in the practice of what I do is I have a conversation with a client and I'm asking them, hey, I'd really like to see your blood work. They get me the blood work. It's usually like most of what I need, but it's missing the crucial information that I need. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I have to have a conversation with them. Go back to your doctor, tell your doctor, I also would like to see this, this, and this. That is usually met with, you don't need to get tested on that. Everything looks fine. I don't know why you're asking me for this. There's no reason for us to do this. Then I have the conversation of, well, it's not your doctor's fault, but they weren't trained with that kind of lens of like, let's look at this from the nutrition piece. Let's look for patterns. Let's look for the possibility of like, to your point of by the time that someone is reaching a high or low level of some kind of biofeedback marker, not that it's too late, but that was 10 years of decision making that we could have intervened with in some way. And it then becomes like a huge education opportunity, which is great. So I look at it as the opportunity, but it is really frustrating as a practitioner to not be able to help my clients get exactly what they need. And we figure out ways to work around it and jump through hoops, but then they're also forking over a lot of additional money to be able to do it by just me going directly somewhere else to get what they need. And I imagine that's where something like your company comes in. So I'd love to kind of tie that all together.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're so right. It's a different philosophy. I think the medical system is so much about waiting around until things get bad enough that they fit the criteria for a disease and then treating them with usually a drug, instead of trying to optimize every factor that we can about your health before it becomes a problem and help you live as, with as much vitality as possible. And so that's why I've been very grateful to work for Wild Health. I always knew, even in residency, I didn't want to practice in a traditional setting, and getting the experience I did in functional and integrative medicine, it's just been a dream to be able to work for a company that gets it and that is putting it into practice and that is helping to expand this type of care to as many people as possible. So what we do, how it really works is what we practice is called precision medicine. So the idea is that we want to look at every data point we can get about you. So the opposite of what you just said.
Yeah, I love that.
Every data point we
love
can.
It.
And
the more data, the better.
Right. Knowledge is power. And so let's look at everything we can, and then let's come up with a plan that's really personalized to you, because we're all different. And let's take a data-driven approach. So let's experiment with things. Let's think about this as an experiment. Let's try things, see if they work. If they're moving our numbers in the right direction, great. If not, let's go back to the drawing board. And so for our patients, when they come in, we look at a full DNA panel, a full laboratory panel. It's very extensive. We ask all kinds of questions about your history, your lifestyle, your preferences, your goals. We love using wearable data. So if someone's wearing a sleep tracker, HRV tracker, we love to use CGMs, as you talked about, Levels, and Dr. Casey Means, any data we can get our hands on. And, we'll look at microbiome data, all kinds of things. And then we put all this together. We have an algorithm that puts all this together and helps us to deliver recommendations that are really personalized in a number of different areas. So we'll go through nutrition, we'll go through exercise, sleep.
Awesome.
Mindfulness and meditation is a big one, or sort of mental health. We'll look at chronic disease prevention. So looking at your heart disease risk or Alzheimer's risk, your inflammation, insulin resistance, microbiome. And then we look at your longevity as well, and things like cancer risk. And, the algorithm is awesome that we have, but what's really awesome is that we get to sit down and have a conversation with you. So it's myself as the doctor, the patient, and their health coach, and we're always talking together. So we're all a team, and we also love pulling other people into those conversations. So if the patient's already working with, a nutritionist, or they have another coach or something that they're working with, we like to kind of be the quarterback and say, here's all the data. Let's look at it from each of our unique perspectives so we can help create the best plan for this person. And then it's a matter of deciding, based on what your goals are, based on the numbers that we're seeing, let's pick out a few things that are going to have the highest impact. So for example, maybe you have some early insulin resistance and we want to address that. Maybe we make some changes to your diet that are specific to your genes. So maybe, your genes are showing you have a high carb intolerance. Maybe you have a SH2B3 SNP and you have a high chance of having gluten sensitivity. So we want to remove gluten. And then we're going to use a CGM to help get some moment by moment data about how foods are impacting you. We're going to implement that plan for a few months. Your health coach is going to help you navigate that, like recipes, what foods to buy. And then we're going to recheck your markers, your hemoglobin A1C in 3 months and see if we're moving in the right direction. And if we are, great. And then let's figure out what we can optimize next.
Two big things that I take away from there that I wish and I want to underscore, because if anybody's listening to this, I see as the most powerful in terms of what I do with a lot of my clients on a day-to-day basis. The first is what you said in using the word experiment. And I think the challenge around that is the diet culture, quick fix results. And no one wants to experiment because they want it now. And I love that you use that word, because it's one of those things where so many of my clients will ask me questions around like, well, how soon is this going to happen for me? Or what is the timeline for this going to look like? And I always want to give as much structure as I can, but a good coach is also going to say it depends. And that's really the best answer you can give. And I know it's frustrating to hear that sometimes, but it's so powerful to understand that this is an experiment because everyone is different. And to tie it into the second thing I wanted to highlight, what you said about what's going to have the highest impact. I like to refer to that as the lowest hanging fruit, because that actually goes all the way back to how we opened this conversation. What can you handle, right? Like you could have somebody that comes to you and you're looking at a lot of their biofeedback and assessing this data, and there could be 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 different routes that you could go of information that you're saying, okay, there's an insulin sensitivity going on here. Is something going on with gluten? How poor is their sleep, whatever it is. And it's completely setting somebody up for failure to try to get them to handle all of that at once. Plus, I often find that it's a domino effect. Like if we can start with the root cause, that usually also happens to be the lowest hanging fruit at the same time. And then things will start to fall into place too.
Absolutely. I think you made so many great points. And yeah, we're all about the N of 1 experiment. And I think, we have to think about all of us as finding the perfect lifestyle for each of us is an experiment, and it's constantly evolving as we go through different phases of life and our goals change and our bodies change. So we're probably never going to arrive and then just be that I wish for the rest of our lives. But it's also thinking about, the risk associated with each of these interventions. I think a lot of in a conventional medical setting, if the interventions are higher risk, we might be less likely to try them. But when we're talking about lifestyle, we're talking about low risk interventions most of the time, trying to make some diet changes, trying supplements that are generally going to have very little downside, other than maybe expense is something we always have to consider, or interactions. But yeah, I think you make a great point there. And just having, like you said, the control is something just to like control what you can control and have patience to know that we're going to get there, and think about it with curiosity. And then the second point, remind me what you were talking about with, with these experiments. It's important to, why the genetics I think are so helpful, and why I found them to be so helpful as a physician, is it helps us arrive at the best destination much more quickly. So we can do these experiments and we can start trying stuff like on, let's try a keto diet, let's try a low carb diet. But if we have your genes, we can make much more educated guesses about what might be the best diet for you. And we don't know for sure until we try it and we see how you feel and how you respond, but we can make much more educated guesses about how to get there more quickly. So it does speed up that process a little bit.
I think there's a lot of people who could be like, I'm interested in that for sure. Because I also think too, that's where like the experiment word can make people feel some type of way, because when they're doing this by themselves and before they pull in an expert like yourself, like the Wild Health team, or working with any kind of coach, it's coming from a lot of contradictory information from people who might not necessarily be the most appropriate to be sharing it. And then you just get confused. And of course, you're throwing your hands up in the air. I always try to level set with any new potential client. And this is a big conversation and more of my general population, even in working in a group with my clients inside of my gym, saying to them, like, the things you're feeling right now, yeah, you can raise your hand and take responsibility and say you showed up and you made certain decisions or you neglected certain things. But there's also another side to this, and that's the side that a lot of it is not your fault because you just don't know where to turn to sometimes, because you're at a point of like, I'm frustrated, I hate how I feel, I don't want to look X kind of way, so I'm willing to try anything.
Totally. Yeah. And back to your previous point, like asking for help is another thing, just in general.
It's
talking
huge.
About big learnings for me is,
yes,
is asking, like, I used to be so afraid of asking for help because I thought I don't want to bother people.
I still am sometimes. I shouldn't say used to.
And so, yeah, like ask people. There's so many people who have the experience, who've been through it before. You know, that's what we love to do at Wild Health, is help to reduce that learning curve for you and help you, guide you so you don't have to go through this alone. And to your point about lowest hanging fruit, I love that also, because a lot of times it's just, well, you don't know what the lowest hanging fruit is or how these things interact. And thinking about, especially as you mentioned, gut health before, a lot of times, you know, people may be trying all these supplements to help with gut health or on probiotics, but we're missing, maybe they're on some foods that are really inflaming their gut. And if we don't remove those, you know, all the rest of the things you're doing are just like spitting in the ocean.
Yeah. So, or maybe this is such a good one, and it's a really great way to illustrate this. A lot of my clients that are dealing with the gut health issues in the first place, one of the first questions we got to ask them is, do you chew your food and do you eat fast? Because digestion starts right here. And whenever I ask that question, they're like, why is that relevant? I'm like, I don't even want to know what you eat. Just answer this one question. And in the first few minutes of whether they choose to work with me or not, I will level set with them and say, you could walk out of here. You could decide that you don't want to be a part of this program. But if you truly have a lot of the symptoms you're describing, I want you to go home. And for the next couple of days, I want you to pay attention to how fast you eat. And I also want you to count how many times you chew something before you swallow it. A very good portion of the time, there is a huge relief in making that one change. And it sounds like so elementary, but it's fundamental.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. The basics are so important. You can't skip the basic.
Totally. And, you know, one other thing I wanted to ask you, and you alluded to this in sharing some of the examples about your personal learnings and asking for help. And I love that example because it actually is very much like the first step of any time I work with a client. I say to them, the first 2-3 months of us being together is you getting comfortable asking for help because that's usually the thing that's blocking you from even showing up on this Zoom call or meeting me and having the guts to like make the decision to be like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and do this. And that's an unlearning that takes a very long time because you didn't do it overnight. That happened from years of going back to your points about childhood. And I totally agree with you because I have gone through the same realizations and had the same amount of, you know, opportunity to do different reflections and think about like, take that time and ask myself like, well, why am I wired the way that I am? And for a while, I found myself questioning that so much because I didn't have a traumatic childhood. I had an amazing childhood. And I've had that conversation with my parents a lot. Like my mom sometimes can't understand why I feel the way that I do. And for her, she's like, I'm looking at your environment. Like it was great. And I totally agree with her. So I'm just as like puzzled. I'll say that.
And it's one of those things, then you start judging yourself. Well, why do I have, where did these things come from? You know, I had the perfect childhood, all these things, but it's not even, I think for me, it's been a light bulb just to realize it doesn't have to be, it's the smallest thing that all of us are exposed to as humans. Like no matter how amazing your childhood and your parents are. And then you think about people who've had really rough childhoods and it's like, wow, you know, you just have so much respect and for the resilience that comes from that.
Absolutely. And I'd love for you, if you're willing to share and kind of dive a little bit deeper into that, into you personally, because you did mention you've done a lot of that healing work. You've been very introspective outside of noticing that you're not the first to raise your hand and ask for help. What were some of those other realizations that you've had? And then more importantly, tell me about some of the work that you've done to move past these things and continue to hopefully make changes.
Yeah. Oh, I would love to. One more point on asking for help while we're here is just that what's helped me is realizing that, you know, humans are made to interact with each other and to be in relationship. And so asking for help is not just a sign of weakness. for us, it's actually a way to build connection with other people. And it's a gift. Like I don't know, I get excited when I get to help someone else. It makes me feel good. And it
That's
makes me feel
literally
like,
what we're paid to do. So for
right.
me, like the last 3 days, I have been probably working more hours and harder than I have. Like I do work hard and I pride myself on that. But I have not, people are like, aren't you exhausted? I'm like, no, I'm actually like, I feel like on top of the world right now, because that feeling of like somebody coming to you with a question for me just like lights me up. And if it didn't, I probably wouldn't be in this space in the first place.
Totally. And so it's a gift. So I always think about that, if I'm hesitating to ask for help, I think, don't take away that gift from somebody else who could help.
I love that. Great perspective.
And to rely on people, like, know that we each have our own strengths, and like, there's a lot of things I am not strong in. And so I'd much rather ask someone else who loves doing it and who's great at it. So I guess for my story and some of the realizations I had, so I mentioned, I realized how much I had been focused a lot on achievements and these external factors. And as a result, going through med school and CrossFit, I was so focused on those things, and I sort of had to be in order to accomplish those goals, but it came at a big cost. And I had really not invested in my relationships in the way that I wish I would have. And so I still had, friends, I still had great relationships with my family, but there was a lot that had been neglected, a lot that had been missing. And so that was a really big part. And I also realized that because of that, there were consequences. So because I wasn't asking for help, because when I had some difficult decisions to make, I didn't have really close inner circle to go to ask their advice. And so I ended up making some decisions that later on probably were not right for me. Or not even being able to listen. I did have some people who maybe tried to give me advice, but I just wasn't in a place to be able to listen and hear what they were saying. So that was a big thing. And since that time have spent a lot of work investing in relationships. And so that's everything from, just investing in developing really close friendships to going back to heal, past relationships that had stuck with me. There was even some friendships back from, high school or even before that I went back to people I hadn't talked to in years and just had conversations or wrote them notes. And it was very healing, I think, for both of us. And same thing, with my family, like telling them about how sorry I was because I just wasn't there for them during this time because I was so focused on myself, and having some of those deeper conversations has been, extremely healing for me. And then spending the time, like doing it in my actions, shifting my priorities so that, yes, I'm still working hard and I'm still, doing things in the world, but I also am not going to ignore the people who are most important to me in order to do those things. And so it's been a lot more time, spending more time with kids, like my friends who have kids. I love spending time with children. Like they just light me up. So doing a lot of those things has been very helpful. Investing in relationships.
How old were you because at this point I know like you've given me some of the timeline, right? Of you were really pursuing CrossFit, and I can completely understand how between that and med school, that's a very isolating space to be in because you also wanted to be at the upper echelon of those things, right? So I think it's really easy to kind of convince yourself of this story of, well, I'm doing this for this higher purpose and like I need to be focused and I need to be dialed in on this. Maybe even to the point where you were like really particular on relationships because you could have probably told yourself the story that X relationship is a distraction, or if this person doesn't have the same value as me, they're just not going to understand me. And obviously I'm making a big assumption here, and this is more me imprinting like my own experience, but I think that's like it's so easy for that to happen. But the reason why I'm asking you how old you were at that point, because let's just address the fact that it is so hard to make friends as an adult. And I would imagine when you were in these like two pretty big pressure cooker environments, even with CrossFit being competitive, and then med school is competitive. Getting your placement into residency is competitive. So there's a degree to which, sure, these people are going through the same shit as you, but sometimes they don't really feel like a friend because they're also the direct person that you got to turn that switch and be like, I got to win here. It's a lot to balance.
Great points. And yes, I was in my, I would say early to mid 20s during that time. And I was lucky that the med school that I went to, it was definitely not your traditional ultra competitive environment.
Okay.
We had a very non-traditional curriculum. We didn't have exams. We didn't have grades. It
That's
was
really
very
cool.
collaborative. But yes, it was still a stressful environment. And I
Yeah.
think the type of people that select to go into med school are naturally competitive.
Of
And
course.
so they're very focused. And I do agree, like at that time in my life, the most important things to me were doing my training and doing what I had to do for school, and everything else was kind of secondary. So it was like, if it worked, great. If not, I'm not going to go out of my way. And
Sure.
same thing with the relationships, like because CrossFit was so important to me at the time, I wasn't doing a lot of social things because it was school and it was training, and I wasn't going to go out late. I wasn't going to go out if people were drinking. I wasn't going to stay out late because I needed sleep. And so, a lot of those things just didn't happen. And so I think, but not to say, like, I have some really great friends from med school and residency,
of course,
but definitely, I don't think I was there for people in the way that I want to be, or the way that I'm able to be now. And so, and I think the other big thing that realization that I had about myself during that time was just that I was doing a lot of things because I thought that's what people expected me to do. I think that there's this path that's laid out for you, like, oh, you go to med school and then you become a doctor and you compete in CrossFit, and of course you're going to go back. And, like I said, a lot of that I had to stop and do some introspection and understand that that was why, my why for doing those things. But there were big things and small things, from, how I use social media to some big decisions that I made in my life that were based on what other people expected me, or what this sort of quote unquote perfect path is supposed to look like, instead of following what was really true for me. And so that was a big change as well, is taking a step back. A lot during that time that I had where I was sort of doing nothing, I spent a lot of time alone. I spent a lot of time off social media. I spent a lot of time, in prayer and meditation and reflection and journaling, and really having to uncover those layers of what actually was my truth, because it had gotten hidden by so many of these other factors, these other voices that you're hearing day to day. And it's not like you can just go take a weekend away and get through to that stuff.
No.
Like, it takes a lot of time and reflection to be able to get kind of down into the depths of your heart and who you are.
Those are huge learnings. And I think as I'm hearing them, the other burning question that I have for you, to tie this back to the work that you do today, and more importantly, who you are as a person, how have those experiences and those realizations, and when I say those experiences, I mean you actually putting in the work, like you actually writing those letters to friends, you actually having those really tough conversations with family members, because that's the other part. It's like, you can make all these realizations, but if you don't do anything with it, it's not going to actually serve you.
You've got to do the work.
Right. And that's usually where people will make, like, there's a make or break in that. But I'd love to know, in relation to wild health and in relation to medicine and in relation to Julie as an MD, how has that experience for you shaped the way you practice and the way you interact with your patients? Because I think that's huge.
Oh, it's so huge. And I think if anything, it's having that firsthand experience and being able to see it in my patients. And it's not always, we get to spend a lot of time with our patients, but it's not always something you're going to bring up in the first conversation.
No, it's like having a therapist. You got to peel back the layers of the onion. You're not going to be besties right away.
If anything, it's helping me to understand people better, and it's helping me to try to ask the right questions, to try to help people, surround them with the right support so that they can do that work on their own. So even like as one example, and we've got great health coaches who are so in tune to this also, but with a lot of my patients, we help direct them to resources to do thought work, to think about, to work on what are the thoughts that you're having? What are the impact of those thoughts on your physiology? And how do you recognize and become aware of them, and not just accept and believe every single thought that you have? Changing around the negative self-talk. I don't know if you've ever heard of Byron Katie, but
I was hoping you were going to bring up Byron Katie. I actually have a Byron Katie worksheet saved to my desktop. That anytime a client tells me that they're in a feedback loop that is really negative, and I got this from a fellow podcast guest, actually. She introduced me to the work.
Yeah,
and,
the work.
She was like, you got to look up this worksheet. And I was like, okay, great. And I read through it and I was like, this is life-changing stuff. So please share for the listeners' benefit, because it's been a while. I remember that episode that we talked about it. It was a long time ago. So kind of walk us through, like, there's a lot with Byron Katie, but what specifically, like, what are some of the worksheets that you're encouraging your patients to utilize?
Yeah, I keep it super simple. Like, I haven't even really, I'm a novice Byron Katie follower here, but I keep it really simple to her 4 questions that are the work. And it's something you can do all the time. If you notice that you're caught in a thought loop, you just ask yourself, is this true? Like, this thought that I'm having, is this true? And maybe you think it is true. And then you have to ask yourself the second question, which is, can I be absolutely 100% positive that this is true?
That's the key part. That one right there.
Because there's always a possibility that it's not true.
Yep.
And so I'm trying to think of an example, like, for example, maybe you're saying, I ruined the whole day because I just ate that cupcake. And you think,
relatable.
Is this true? And it's like, yeah, you might really think it's true in the moment. Like, gosh, the whole day is just gone. But is this absolutely true? Well, there's probably a few, like, some positives you can find in the day. The whole day is probably not ruined. And there's probably a lot of other worse things that could go on during this day. And even then it wouldn't be ruined. And then you ask yourself, well, how do I feel if I believe this thought? Like, if I believe that I ruined my whole entire day because I ate this cupcake, I feel awful. I feel really shameful. I'm sad. I'm angry. Like, I'm having all these negative emotions. And those negative emotions, like, we know now, there's enough science behind it that our thoughts impact our hormones, impact our physiology, impact our immune system. And so that is having this whole, physiological impact on our body during the day. And then you think, the fourth question is, well, how do I feel if I know that thought isn't true, or if I don't believe that thought? And you would probably feel a lot better, right? Like, oh,
liberated.
Yeah, things are okay. And so then it's you do this turnaround where you turn around and you say, like, actually eating this cupcake made my day. Like, maybe this cupcake brought me so much joy because it tasted so good, and I realized that I can have a little bit of fun and have some grace for myself. Now I'm feeling really happy and joyful and excited and, like, proud of myself that I'm not, trying to make myself be perfect. And so just the way that we interpret our thoughts can have such a huge impact on our physiology. And if you allow those thoughts to just, a lot of times they're subconscious. You're not even aware of them. So a lot of the work is just bringing them into your awareness and then starting to do this process. But, if we do that over time, and as I've found personally, you can go from feeling like your head's going to explode with all these crazy negative thoughts all the time to now I most of the time feel very even. And then when I sometimes have these thoughts, I catch them, I'm able to turn them around and let them go. And I don't even feel the stress in my body from them.
I love that.
And it's remarkable. Like, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you, like, I don't think this is ever going to get better. This is awful. But I promise you, if you stick with it and you do that, there's so many other tools you can use, like, it will get better. And it is so worth it. It's so worth it. Even though it's scary and even though it's hard in the moment, it is worth it every single time.
And I really appreciate you sharing that as well, like the whole piece of your own story and your own beliefs and some of your own self-limiting beliefs, because I'm sure you've gotten this before, but I think hearing it from someone like yourself who does have a list of achievements that, like, people look at it and they're like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like, it puts you on this, like, level that people really admire and respect, but they also don't recognize that you're a human being too. And there's hopefully some comfort in that for the person who's listening to think, like, there is a point in your life where you also felt like, oh my God, this isn't going to get better, even when you've accomplished such incredible things.
Absolutely. And that's what it's all about. Like, we are literally all human. And that's where, like, we suffer because we place these other people. We think, like, oh, all these other people must have it all figured out because they look perfect on Instagram and they have all these accomplishments and they have this job title, but nobody's got it figured out. Like, we're all human. We all have to go through this process together. And even though, yes, I'm so much better than I was 2 years ago, I still have a lot of work to do. And there are still days where, sometimes I just want to cry and lay in bed, and, like, that's okay. Like, we're all human. And so it's just embracing that. And I think for me, the most important part is embracing that and just continuing to want to show up and continuing to want to do the work, because when you start to see it pay off, when I'm talking about the work, I'm talking about all of it, not just Byron Katie, but when you see it start to pay off, it gives you hope. And it's like, wow, this stuff does work and it's worth it. And I can be so much happier and more fulfilled.
Yeah. And that, the last thing you said really encapsulates everything you do with your patients, right? The fact that you take this holistic approach, the fact that you are looking at functional medicine, that's where the hope comes in. Like the last 7 words you said, I think are really so key around this idea that like it does work. And it will get better, and actually just starting to believe that. Well, it's really cool that we can then go back and tie the data and all of the information and all of these things to really be able to tell that story, because I think that's often where people can not get a little lost necessarily, but where their mind starts to wander and question, be like, is this really true?
Right. Because sometimes it feels like you're taking 3 steps back.
Oh yeah.
You know, or whatever, like 1 step forward, 3 steps back. But that's where the data can be really helpful too, and it can be helpful to have someone you're working with who can help highlight that for you. Because sometimes as humans, we want to focus on, oh my gosh, my HRV is so low today, and blah, blah, blah. But then if you zoom out and you're like, wow, on the whole, my HRV is actually 10 points higher than it has been, you know, and, there's this other great, I don't know if you follow Adam Grant. He's one of the best Instagram follows, I think, but he had this great post not too long ago, where he showed this person with like 3 steps ahead of them, and they're looking.
I put that on my Instagram story. I know exactly what you're talking about, but keep going.
It's so good. And I needed that. Like someone reminded me of that last week, and I needed it because it looks like when you're looking at the finish line, sometimes it looks like it's so far away and you're just like, wow, I still have so far to go. But then the next picture, they zoom out and they look at the staircase, and behind this person, you know, they're 3 steps from the top, but behind them is like hundreds steps.
Yes.
And so it helps to put things in perspective and look at how far you've come and celebrate that.
Yeah. And that's the other one too, as you were describing that, and obviously using the example of HRV, the one that jumps out to me the most that I'm constantly talking clients off a ledge around is the scale. And then I'll sub that in and say, well, what about progress photos? Let's look at other things that we can measure. But the one thing I do really find is super effective is pulling them out, like saying to them, I feel like I can sound like a broken record with how often I say this, because it's a really easy feedback loop to get stuck in. But a lot of my clients, when they're frustrated with the results, it's because they're so dialed in on like 1 week of data or 2 days or 1 meal. And it's the, hey, zoom out, and repeating that to them again and again, to where all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, wait a second. Half the reason why we collected all these data points on you stepping on the scale was because we wanted to see the average. And if we look at the average trend, things are looking great. Or if we put progress photos side by side and we look at progress pictures that are like 6 months apart instead of 2 weeks apart, you're like, oh shit, I look great, or I am closer. And it's like that reminder of, whenever I feel like a client is noticing a setback in their life, the one thing I'll ask them is, and it took me a long time to realize this as a coach. Like it took me until probably the last 6 months, and I've been doing this for like 5 years. And a lot of that has to do with my own healing and my own experience of hitting a rock bottom and then feeling like I didn't know how to dig out and be able to do it. And ultimately, one of the things that I found that kind of like saves their perspective is to say to them, can you objectively sit in front of me and say to me right now today that the decision you made this past weekend when you went out drinking and ate these things that you felt like you should not have drank or eaten or whatever it was, did you make the best decision you could have in the situation you were in and with the information that you know right now today? And they always say yes.
And even if you didn't, even if maybe you would have made a different decision, like you learned, right? So maybe next time you'll be more aware of it. Maybe you'll make a slightly different decision, and that's awesome too.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I want to be respectful of your time, because we could talk forever, and there'll probably need to be a part 2 to this at some point for sure. So you're always welcome to come back on the show. But I like to wrap everything up with a little bit of a lightning round just to keep it fun. Okay. And because we didn't go like super deep into CrossFit, maybe we'll make that a little bit of the theme, or just the fitness component of everything in our lightning round. So are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right, cool. This might not be a short answer, and that's fine. When you look back at your CrossFit career, was there one event or like one instance, one competition that is a favorite memory or really stands out to you for some reason?
Oh, this is an easy one. I have so many really special favorite memories, but this one is really easy. In 2015, so this was my last season, I had already, in previous seasons been on the podium in third place and in second place. My last season, it was my last shot to try to win it all. I had, overcome milestones in training that I had been working against, overcome a lot of mental challenges. I was fitter than I've ever been. And I was at our regional competition to qualify for the games. And on the second day of competition, right in the middle of competition, I tore my Achilles.
Oh my God.
It was so devastating. But at the same time, it was also the most powerful moment that I've had. And it was really epitomized what CrossFit is all about, because the very next event after I tore it was a handstand walk. And so I was able to go out on the floor and do my handstand walk. And after that event, I just felt the power of the whole CrossFit community, like cheering me on. And that's what it's about. It's about having people cheer you on when you're at a low point, like cheering the last person in to finish the workout. The whole community feeling sort of my heartbreak and being there with me. It was a moment that I will never, ever forget. And it also, even though I didn't get to compete in the games that year, it just epitomized for me how much it really is about the journey. It's not about the outcome, but it really is about all the ways that I grew through my years of competing and season after season, just getting stronger physically and mentally.
That's so cool. I love that. Love everything about what you just said. What's your fitness routine like today?
So I still do CrossFit. I will always do CrossFit. And I've been much less. I would love to be in the affiliate more. I unfortunately have not. I do a lot in my garage.
Okay.
But I try
still
to
getting it done.
Yeah, I try to make it to an affiliate at least a couple times a week, once or twice a week. And then I love to do yoga once a week as well. That's been something that's really been great for me.
Very cool. What is your favorite food? If you could only eat one thing for the rest of your life, that's how I usually ask this question.
Okay, if I could only eat one thing for the rest of my life, I don't know if it's my favorite, but it's up there and it's so good, I've been doing this green smoothie bowl that I've basically tried to put in max nutrient density and also make it taste good. And so I've been making it almost every day, and it has, all of the nutrients you need. It's got protein, lots of micronutrients. And so that would probably be, if I could only eat one thing, that would be it.
Very practical answer. We'll let you have that as a doctor.
So that would be my other favorite.
That's allowed. We'll let that one go. What is, I don't know if you're a big reader or like an Audible person, but maybe in the last 6 months, year or so, is there a book in particular that you've read that you think every listener should consider picking up themselves?
Oh my gosh. There are so many good books. I will say, just for the purpose of this interview and question, I will say The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
Cool.
It is an all-time great book. I couldn't recommend it anymore.
I'm going to put that on my list because I don't know it. So thank you.
Yeah, let me know what you think.
I totally will. I appreciate that. I love to read. And last but not least, final question to close out the show. If somebody's made it all the way to the end of this interview and there's just only one thing you can leave them with, whether you've said it already or you haven't, the takeaway from the conversation or just something that you feel like you want to be your message, what would that be? To
keep it really simple, I would just say, be you. Follow your heart, follow your truth. I think that there is so much, disease that happens from, in various ways from people that are not doing that, the stress that comes with it. So I would just say, be you. Don't listen to, use your wise counsel, the people that know you, that you trust, but don't make your decisions based off of what the world expects from you. Just do you.
Love it. Amazing. Well, Julie, thank you again for your time. This was such a fun conversation. Truly mean it when I say I'd love to have you back on, because there are truly so many different things that we could talk about. But thank you for everything you shared. Thank you for sharing so much about your personal story. I just find podcasting so powerful in that. And as I mentioned when we first opened up the show, it'd been a minute since I had a guest, and every time I do this, it reminds me of my why, of selfishly what I love about this. And you nailed it when you made the comment about human connection and how important that is for us and asking for help. And I get the opportunity to do that every time I record a show with another guest. And I'm really, really grateful for that. And I have no doubt in my mind that there are a ton of FYX listeners and anybody out there who might be brand new to the show who could really benefit from hearing this. So thank you for that. And as the very, very last thing, of course, where can we stay connected with you? Where are you on social media? How can we stay in touch with Wild Health? Give us all the rundown with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I love this conversation, and I love being able to have conversations like this that are so personal, but also I get to talk about the things I'm most passionate about with medicine and CrossFit and how to help people become their healthiest selves. So for Wild Health, you can learn more at wildhealth.com, and we have a discount code for your listeners specifically. Awesome. So FYX20, FYX20 will get them 20% off.
We'll put that down in the show notes.
And then you can follow Wild Health MD at Wild Health MD on Instagram, and the Wild Health podcast also has tons of great info for people who are interested. And then me personally, I'm at Julie Foucher on Instagram, and my podcast is called Pursuing Health.
Love it. We'll definitely put all of that down in the show notes. I'm very confident that if you enjoy this podcast, you will love both of those podcasts. So I'm going to start listening to them too. I appreciate that. And from wherever everybody's listening from, this has been another amazing episode for the FYX podcast. Julie, thank you again. And I hope all of you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.